Cleveland has a real problem now. Because this was not just a road loss. This was not just one of those playoff nights where a team misses a few jumpers, shrugs it off, and tells itself everything will look cleaner back home. No, this felt heavier than that.
The Cavaliers had their chance in Game 2. They made the push. They grabbed the lead early in the fourth. Donovan Mitchell gave them 31. Jarrett Allen bounced back with 22. And none of it mattered. Detroit answered every single time. Cade Cunningham owned the late-game possessions that actually decide playoff games. And now the Pistons are heading to Cleveland up 2-0, looking like the team with the clearer identity, the tougher edge, and honestly, the better feel for what this series is supposed to be.
And that right there is the part that should scare Cleveland.
Because if you watch this game, it did not feel fluky. It felt repeatable. It felt like Detroit knew exactly where the pressure points were, exactly who to attack, exactly how ugly to make the game, and exactly how patient they needed to be once Cleveland started wobbling. This series is starting to look less like an upset story and more like a matchup problem that the Cavs still have not solved. One of the show reactions you sent put it really well. Detroit looks mentally and physically stronger, and they keep winning the battles that turn playoff games into knife fights.
And if we are being real, one of the biggest pressure points in this series has been James Harden.
Again!
Harden finished Game 2 with 10 points on 3 for 13 shooting and 4 turnovers. That by itself is bad enough, but the uglier part is how it looked. Possessions got sticky, the ball stayed in his hands too long, the rhythm died, the defense got set, and every time Cleveland needed clarity, Harden gave them fog. One of the analysts in your transcript said Detroit kept hunting the weakest link on defense all night and named Harden the Rakely. Another pointed out that after 2 games in this series, Harden had 11 turnovers and only 9 made field goals. That is brutal. That is not just a bad shooting stretch. That is a player losing the geometry of the series.
And this is where the easy version of the conversation starts, right? Playoff Harden. The usual collapse. Same movie, different year. I get it. I really do. The jokes are sitting right there on the table. The beard, the dribbles, the late-game turnover, the whole hold the ball for 14 seconds just to deliver sadness routine. It is all there.
But the bigger issue is not just that Harden was bad.
The bigger issue is that Detroit knew exactly how to make him bad. That's what changes the tone of this series. Detroit is not sitting back and hoping Cleveland self-destructs. They are actively creating the conditions for that destruction. They are leaning on Cleveland physically, shrinking the floor, forcing slower decisions, and then picking at the weakest matchup until the whole structure starts to bend. One of the strongest insights from the halftime breakdown you sent was that Cleveland simply cannot afford to play slowly against this Pistons team. If they get methodical, if they hold the ball, if they pre-decide the action, that is exactly what Detroit wants. The Pistons are too physical, too organized, and too comfortable making every possession feel annoying.
And that is exactly what happened in Game 2.
Detroit led most of the night. They were up 25-18 after 1 and carried an 11-point lead into halftime. Cleveland spent the first half trying to survive its own offense, then finally found a little life later on, and for one brief moment early in the fourth, it looked like maybe they were about to steal the game anyway. The Cavs opened the quarter on a 6-0 run, and Evan Mobley's dunk put them ahead 81-79. That should have been the turning point. That should have been the moment the veteran team steadies itself, gets 2 clean possessions, and makes the building nervous.
Instead, that was the moment Detroit reminded everybody whose game this was. Tobias Harris tied it. Duncan Robinson hit a huge 3. The crowd came back to life. Cade slowed the game down and started touching the right parts of the floor again. And just like that, Cleveland's little window slammed shut. That is what impressed me most about Detroit in this game. They never looked rushed by the emotional swings. They looked prepared for them. Like, yeah, cool, your run is over now. That's a grown-up playoff response. And Cade Cunningham is the biggest reason that response felt so calm. His final line was 25 points and 10 assists, which already sounds like a star line. But the real story is when he scored. Cade had 12 points in the fourth quarter. He got to the line 8 times and made all 8 free throws. He was not hunting numbers. He was hunting control. And that matters.
Because there is a difference between a guy who puts up 25 and a guy who takes ownership of the last 6 minutes of a playoff game. Cade did the second one. That is why more and more this series feels like it is happening on his terms.
One of the analysts in your show transcripts flat out said it. Right now, Cade looks like the best player in this series. And honestly, after 2 games, that is getting harder and harder to argue with. Not because Donovan Mitchell has been bad. Donovan has been carrying a ridiculous burden. But Cade is controlling the emotional pace of the series. He looks like the guy who sees the map. He knows when to attack, when to wait, when to take the mismatch, and when to trust the weak side pass. That is superstar stuff, even when it does not scream at you.
What makes Cade so hard to deal with is that he does not always beat you in a loud way. Sometimes it just looks like he is walking through the game with a flashlight while everyone else is trying not to trip over furniture. He comes off a screen, feels the drop, gets to the elbow, manipulates the weak side help, and before you know it, he has either the pull-up, the foul, or the kickout. One of the tactical breakdowns in your source pointed out that Cleveland still is not making him operate in traffic enough. They're letting him see too much space in those elbow areas. They're not shrinking gaps consistently enough. And in the playoffs, if a primary creator gets to play comfortable, you are done.
And this is where Detroit's supporting cast deserves real credit.
Because this was not Cade solo carrying some heroic game. This was Cade controlling the engine while the rest of Detroit actually punished the openings. Tobias Harris had 21 and once again looked like the kind of veteran who understands exactly what playoff basketball asks of him. No wasted motion, no insecurity, no pretending that 11 dribbles is a personality trait. J.B. Bickerstaff had a great line in the postgame about Tobias knowing his spots and not confusing endless dribbling with actual game. And man, you could feel that. Tobias looked composed in a game where Cleveland kept looking more frantic.
Duncan Robinson gave Detroit 17 points and hit 5 threes. Those were not empty threes either. They were momentum threes. They were you finally clawed your way back. Now hold this threes. And then there was Danish Jenkins with 14 off the bench, including that 30-foot buzzer beater to end the third quarter. That shot mattered way more than people will remember. Instead of heading into the fourth with the game feeling almost level, Cleveland had to spend even more emotional energy just getting back to even. That is how playoff games get tilted without everyone noticing it in real time.
That is really the hidden story of this game. Detroit kept forcing Cleveland to reset.
Every time the Cavs got a little rhythm, something interrupted it. A big Harris shot, a Robinson three, a Cade free throw trip, a Jenkins bomb, a physical half-court possession where nothing came easy. This did not feel like a game Detroit survived. It felt like a game Detroit managed, and that is a huge difference in a second-round series.
Now flip it over to Cleveland, and the problem gets wider than Harden.
Because Donovan Mitchell was excellent. Jared Allen was much better. Cleveland even took better care of the ball overall than they did in Game 1. But they still scored only 97 points, shot 7 for 32 from 3, and missed all 11 of their three-point attempts in the fourth quarter. Evan Mobley also finished with just 9 points, which is the kind of quiet offensive night Cleveland cannot really afford in a game like this. So yes, Harden was the loudest problem, but he was not the only problem. The Cavs did not just lose because one guy choked. They lost because Detroit turned them into a team that could not get to its best version often enough.
And I think that is the part a lot of people miss when they reduce this to Harden disaster class.
Sure, roast him. He earned that. I am not here to protect playoff Harden discourse in the year 2026. That man is going to have to live with the slander. But the more serious basketball point is that Cleveland's whole offensive personality looks wrong right now. Too much hesitation, too much standing, too many possessions where it feels like the read comes one beat late. And against this Detroit team, one beat late might as well be a turnover. That is why one of the analysts said Cleveland has to play quicker, move the ball side to side, and make fast decisions. If they let Detroit get their hands on the possession, Detroit wins the possession. Simple as that.
And Detroit is not apologizing for any of it, by the way.
J.B. Bickerstaff basically said the quiet part out loud after the game. He said Detroit has to stay true to its identity, stay physical, stay handsy, and keep wearing on the opponent. He even said the objective is to fatigue you and make you play through as much legal contact as possible. That is not subtle. That is not random. That is the game plan. Detroit wants you tired, irritated, sped up mentally, and slowed down physically. And right now, Cleveland is giving them exactly that version of itself.
So where does that leave the series?
Well, 2-0 is not 3-0. Cleveland is going home for Game 3, and there is still a very obvious path back into this. They were undefeated at home in the first round, and if their shooters wake up, the math of the series changes pretty quickly. Donovan Mitchell is still fully capable of detonating a game. Mobley can absolutely be more involved. Allen can keep punishing inside. And yes, Harden can still have one of those games where he temporarily escapes the yearly playoff trial in the court of public opinion. Game 3 is not some ceremonial event. Cleveland can absolutely punch back.
But here is the problem for the Cavs. This series no longer feels like it is waiting for them to figure it out.
It feels like Detroit already has.
That is why the pressure feels different now. It is not just that Cleveland is down 0-2. It is that Detroit looks like the team with the sturdier blueprint. They defend with purpose, they know who to target, they are getting real contributions from Tobias Harris, Duncan Robinson, and Dennis Jenkins. Cade is closing games like a star, and their coach is openly telling you that the point is to make this whole thing feel miserable. That is not a cute underdog story. That is a team becoming a real playoff problem.
And that brings us back to Harden.
Because yeah, he is the easy headline. But in a weird way, he is also the symbol of the bigger issue. When Cleveland needs clarity, he has given them clutter. When they need pace, he has given them pause. When they need clean possessions, he has given them just enough indecision for Detroit to take over the possession before the shot even happens. That is why the late turnover with 33 seconds left felt so perfect in the worst possible way. It was not just a mistake. It was the entire shape of Cleveland's problem compressed into one play.
So if you are the Cavaliers, the adjustment cannot just be, please let Harden play better.
Of course they need him better. That part is obvious.
But more than that, they need the game to look different. Faster decisions, more second side action, more pressure on Detroit before the defense gets to load up, more involvement from Mobley, more possessions where Mitchell does not have to rescue everything at the end of the clock. They need to stop playing Detroit's game and start forcing Detroit to answer theirs. Because right now, this series belongs to the team that is more comfortable in the mud.
And that team is Detroit.
Not Cleveland.
At least not yet.
So yeah, Game 3 matters a lot. Because if Cleveland cannot flip the tone of this series at home, then all the jokes about Harden are going to be the least of their problems.
The real problem is that Detroit might just be better built for this fight.
And after 2 games, that no longer sounds crazy at all.